So, pleasure to introduce Marie-Françoise Roy from Rennes, and she is going to tell us how to make Hilbert more effective. Take it away.
Okay, so I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me and asking me also to give a talk, which is, I think, very different from what we've seen already in these meetings. So I hope the organizers they know what they are doing, but in any case, that's what I want to talk about. Okay, so it's a very simple problem when we start with, which is if we take a non-negative polynomial, is it the sum of squares of polynomials? And indeed, there are some positive answers, such like when the number of variables is equal to 1, because in that case, you decompose the polynomial in pieces degree 2 factors, which are sums of squares, degree 1 factors, which appear with even degrees. So finally, multiplying sums of squares, you get sums of squares, so they are sums of squares. Now another simple case is when the degree is 2, because when you have a non-negative quadratic form, you write it as a sum of square of linear factors, and the coefficients have to be non-negative. Okay? But it's not true in general, and it was already known to Hilbert, but the first explicit counterexample goes back to Motzkin in 1969, and he proved that this polynomial of degree 6 in 2 variables is non-negative everywhere, for every value of x and y, but is not a sum of square of polynomials. So how do you see that?
When you say it was known to Hilbert, so Hilbert knew it was true but didn't have an
Yes, yes. So he had some, he had some, I don't know, we don't know exactly what he knew, but there was no, he knew it well enough to reformulate his problem in other terms, which I'm going to explain later. But there was no explicit counterexample. But for some reason, him and Minkowski knew that it was not true in general, but without any explicit counterexample. So let's look at Motzkin. So this polynomial is non-negative. Why is it the case? Because you see the sum of the 3 first terms divided by 3 is the arithmetic, well, it's some kind of arithmetic mean, but if you take the geometric mean of these 3 same terms, you will find x squared, y squared. And you know that the arithmetic mean is always at least the geometric mean. Okay? So you take the cubic root of the product of the 3 terms, and you compare it with the average of these 3 terms, which is the arithmetic mean. But it's also the case that m is not a sum of square, and the int, I mean, it's really very simple. You try to write it as a sum of square of polynomials of degree 3, and you check that it is impossible. For example, you can see already that no monomial x3 can appear in the sum of square, because otherwise some x6 will appear in this polynomial, so you have this monomial cannot appear, hence other monomials cannot appear, and finally it's impossible to write this polynomial as a sum of squares. So you need to reformulate the problem, and the reformulation was already proposed apparently by Minkowski to Hilbert, and the question is one of these Hilbert problems, the 17th problem. And now he's asking if a non-negative polynomial is a sum of square of rational functions, which means that now you are allowing denominators in the sum of squares. And there is some non-constructive, very famous affirmative answer by Artin that I'm going to explain now. Okay, so how is it working? First, is by contraposition. You suppose that P is not a square of rational, not a sum of squares of rational function. Since the sums of squares form a proper cone of the field of rational function and do not contain P. Well, so what is a cone? It's a containing squares and closed under addition and multiplication. The proper cone also doesn't contain -1. So these sums of squares form a proper cone. Now you use Zorn's lemma to get a maximal proper cone of the field of rational function, which also does not contain P. And such a maximal cone, because it's maximal, defines the total order on the field of rational function. Okay. Now you need the notion of a real closed field. So a real closed field is, so it was introduced by Artin and Schreier in a paper which was preliminary to this paper of Artin and Hilbert's 17th problem. So a real closed field is a totally ordered field with the property that positive elements are squares and a polynomial of odd degree as a root. So it's kind of algebraization of the notion of real numbers. And every totally ordered field has a real closure, more or less in the spirit of every field has an algebraic closure. It's slightly different because here, in a way, the real closure is a more constructive notion, but I don't want to enter into that. And finally, so because of this total order, you can take the real closure of the field of rational function for the order constructed by Zorn's lemma, and this gives us a field in which P takes a negative value because P is not in the positive part of the, is not positive in this total order. And in fact, the place where P takes negative value is the set of variables x1, xk. It's just a generic point of the field at which P is now taking negative value in the corresponding real closure. And now, of course, this is good, except that we found a point where the polynomial takes a negative value, but this point doesn't belong to the reals as we wanted to. So we need to come back to the reals, and in fact, we need the transfer principle, which is taking us that if P is taking a negative value over some real closed field extension, it's going to take a negative value over the reals, and that's the first instance of a transfer principle in real algebraic geometry. And as in the proof of Artin, he is mentioning Sturm theorem or Hermite quadratic form. For some reason, I prefer Hermite quadratic form, as I'm going to tell you. Okay, so let me first comment this transfer principle. Of course, at the time of Artin, it was not totally general, it was then generalized by Tarski. But the idea that a statement which is involving elements of a base field, here R, which is true in a real closed field containing R, such that, for example, the real closure of the field of rational function for a given chosen total order is also true over the reals. And of course, it's not going to be true for any statement. It has to be true only for first order logical statement. And an example of such statement is the one we're interested in, which is for every x1, xk, p of x1, xk non-negative. That's a first order statement. So if it's true in a real closed field containing R, it's going to be true in R. And this is a special case of quantifier elimination over the reals. Okay, so maybe everybody knows it here, but in any case, I'll remind you. So what is quantifier elimination? It's the fact that given a formula where a quantifier appears, so it has to be a first order formula, it is equivalent to a formula where the same quantifier doesn't appear and one variable disappeared. Like, for example, this very, of course, classical result from high school. And what does it mean? First, it means that the first statement there is x is potentially infinite. We are looking among an infinite domain of real numbers, but the second statement is something you can check in a finite way, because it's only given ABC, check whether b squared minus 4ac is not 0. And then it means that if the first statement is true, maybe the x exists in an extension, but since b squared minus 4ac belongs to the base field, then it is going to be true also over the reals. And in fact, well, the work of Tarski is that this elementary example can be totally generalized for any first order statement, and it's going to be using some generalization of Sturm theorem or Hermite quadratic form. Okay, so maybe I explain Hermite quadratic form. So if you are given a polynomial, univariate polynomial P, you look at its set of roots inside an algebraically closed field, and you look at kind of moments, which is the sum of the powers of all the powers of x, being a root of P in C. And we take into account the multiplicity. And we construct a square matrix, which is symmetric and also an Hankel matrix in the sense that on the anti-diagonals, all the elements are equal. Okay, so I'll just give you an example in this case. So this is my polynomial. I express it as a times x minus x1, x minus x2, and what are these n0 and 1 and n2? N0 is just the sum of the two roots to the power 0, this is 2, that's the degree of the polynomial. Then the sum of the two roots is minus b divided by a, and the product of the two roots is c divided by a, but I need x1 square plus x2 square, which is x1 plus x2 square minus 2x1 x2. Okay, and this is b square minus 2ac divided by a2, it's not 4, it is 2. And then the Hermite matrix is just this 2, 2 matrix, which I write here, and when I look at its determinant, I get delta divided by a square. And in fact, from this, you can see that the Hermite matrix is, the signature of this Hermite matrix is going to be 2 if delta is positive. It means that this quadratic form is going to be the sum of two squares. It's going to be 1 if delta equals 0. That's when the quadratic form is just 1 square. And delta strictly negative, it will correspond to the signature equal to 0, which is when you have a difference of two squares. Okay, so the signature of this Hermite quadratic form, at least in this special case, is computing the number of real roots. And it's something true in general. So the first thing to notice is that we can compute these Newton sums starting from the coefficients of the polynomial by these formulas, which is giving some linear system. If you are some triangular system, if you are given the ai's, which are the coefficients of the polynomials, then you can deduce the ni's, which are the Newton sum that you want to enter in this matrix. It means that you don't need to compute the roots, which of course you would be unable to do. You just get these moments, these coefficients of the Hermite matrix from the coefficients. And now the general result, which I illustrated in the case of a polynomial of degree 2, is the fact that the signature of this Hermite quadratic form is the number of real roots of the polynomial. And how do you prove it? You prove it by using complex conjugate roots, because they contribute for a difference of 2 squares in this in the signature of the quadratic form. So finally, they don't count. Pairs of complex conjugate roots don't contribute to the signature. So we need to generalize this a little bit, and we do it this way. Now we are given another polynomial q, not only p, and we define ni of pq. So again, it's the sum for all the roots, all the complex roots of p, of the multiplicity multiplied by x to the I, but then we weight it by multiplying by q of x. And again, this is, we can do the same thing than here, except that we put Hermite of pq rather than Hermite of p by using this definition. And again, the signature of this associated, of the quadratic form has some meaning, and it's what we define as the Tarski query of p and q, and it is the sign for all the roots, for all the real roots of p, it's the sum for all the real roots of p of the sign of q of x. So the sign of q of x is either +1 or 0 or -1, depending whether q of x is strictly positive, null, or strictly negative. And you see, for example, if q equals 1, you just get the usual number of real roots, because 1 is positive at all the real roots. And again, in order to prove this proposition, you use the fact that complex conjugate roots contribute for a difference of 2 squares, so they don't count in the corresponding signature. Okay, so that's what we need to know about Hermite quadratic form. So finally, I summarize again the proof of Artin, as I told you before. Okay, so you start from P, which is not a sum of square. You use the notion of proper cone, you get a total order, you get the real closure for this total order, you get a point where the polynomial takes negative value, and you come back using a transfer principle to have a point on R where the polynomial is taking a negative value, and this is using Hermite's quadratic form. Okay, so why are not we too happy with this? Well, it's a very indirect proof because it's by contraposition and using them. And in fact, already in this paper, it's interesting to see that Artin notes that effectivity is desirable but difficult. And in fact, he wanted to come back to this, and he never did. And in particular, we have absolutely no hint on the denominators, no degree bounds on the denominator. So there are effective problems. First, is there an algorithm checking whether a given polynomial is everywhere non-negative? If it is the case, how can we provide a sum of squares? And of course, quantifier elimination is going to decide whether the polynomial is everywhere non-negative, but we don't know how to construct the representation. And of course, the complexity problems, which is what are the best possible degree bounds for the degrees of the polynomials in the representation, especially in the denominator. Okay, so that's what we are trying to do. So apparently, Artin thought it would be good to have a effective proof, and when he saw the progress of proof theory with Kreisel and people like that, he mentioned the problem to Kreisel, and Kreisel has a paper, 5-page paper that I don't really understand, but he had a student, Dakin, who wrote a very long PhD, and it was later on worked by Henri Lombardi and Schmidt, a student from Dortmund. And finally, what is obtained this way is a constructive proof which gives primitive recursive degree bounds on the number of variables and the degree of the polynomial. And our recent work is another constructive proof, which is now elementary recursive. So I'm going to write it. So it's a tower of 5 exponentials. The 2, the 3, the b, the 4, the k. So k is the number of variables, and b is the degree.
It's a bound of what?
Hmm?
It's a bound of what?
It's a bound on the degree of the representation. So if you have a polynomial p in k variables, which is of degree d, and which is everywhere non-negative, you can write it as a sum of squares with this degree at the numerator and denominator.
Wow.
Okay, so it's kind of,
Pretty big.
yeah, sure. Okay, I'll tell you about the lower bound, that's even more depressing, because it's very small. Okay, so in fact, we need to, in order to deal with Hilbert 17 problem, we need to generalize it to another slightly more general problem, which is called positive Stellensatz. So it's coming back to Krivine and Stengler in 60s and 70s. And we want to find algebraic identities certifying that a given system of same conditions is empty. So of course there are some already examples in which is called the Nussstellensatz. So the Nussstellensatz is the following, is kind of simple. So if you are given a field and an algebraically closed extension of this field, you want to characterize the fact that P1 equals PS equals 0 has no solution in CK. And this is done by saying that there exists some kind of linear combination of P1 PS, which is equal to 1. So you see that this is kind of algebraic certificate of the fact that there are no solutions, because if you plug in any x here on that side, and you suppose that P1 PS equals 0, you would arrive to the conclusion that 0 equals 1, which is not possible. Okay. And so this direction is clear. The other direction, which is starting from P1 PS having no solution, and you notice that the no solutions are in CK, but the combination of polynomials in the basic field K. So you need to do something which is not too complicated. I'm going to describe it. And for real numbers, it's going to be a similar statement, except that it's going to be slightly more complicated. Okay, so let's discuss a little bit this quantitative Nussstellensatz. Okay, and what we want to know is what are the degrees of this AI? And it was already proved by Greta Hermann in 1925, so she was a student of Hilbert, that you can, using resultants, you can find double exponential degree in K the idea that you eliminate variables one after the other. You take the first resultant and the resultant of resultant and so on, and finally you get this double exponential degree. But more recently, there were some analytic methods, then algebraic methods by Collard, and more recently improved by Sombra. At the end, you get single exponential degrees, and there are examples of where such single exponential degrees are needed. By single exponential, we mean d to the k. So that's the situation for the positive students. So this is the situation for that I'm going to tell you for Hilbert-17 problem and for Michel and Zas. It is only okay, so what is going to replace this kind of algebraic identity, which means in fact that 1 is in the ideal generated by P1, PS. We're going to have something a little more complicated in the real case. So here we take an ordered field, and just to simplify slightly the formulas, which are already horrible, we suppose that positive elements have a square root, and it will just make it a little simpler. And we take a real closed extension of this ordered field. And we want a condition, we want some algebraic certificate for the fact that a system of sign conditions where some polynomials are not zero, some polynomials are non-negative, and some polynomials are zero, have no solution in Rk. And this is going to be of the form s plus n plus z equals 0, where s is going to be visibly strictly positive given the hypothesis, n is going to be non-negative given the hypothesis, and z is going to be 0 given the hypothesis. So again, if we have something strictly positive plus something non-negative plus something equal to 0, it means that it's impossible. So this is a certificate of the fact that this set has no solution. And what is the strictly positive elements? Well, they are just the squares, product of squares of the one which are non-negative, which are not 0 here. The non-negative elements are the ones which belong to the cone generated by the pi. So it is sum of product of pi weighted by sums of squares. And z is just the ideal generated by the one which are supposed to be 0. Okay? So again, we have this notion of incompatibility. So we say that H is incompatible with the arrows down like that. If there exists S, N, and Z, such that S plus N plus Z equals 0, where S is visibly strictly positive, so it means it's the monoid generated, the monoid associated to the system of sign condition, that is just the product of the squares of these elements. N is in the cone associated to H, which means to start from this polynomial, to multiply them, and to multiply by sums of squares, and Z is just the ideal generated by the one which are 0. Okay? So again, this, if we are given this kind of equality, it's clear that this system of hypothesis has no solution. But of course, what's complicated is, given the fact that we know that there are no solutions, how do we produce this expression here? Okay. And we need to define the degree, because at the end I told you I'll get a degree, so we need to be able to follow the degree. And it's kind of strange because s plus n plus z equals 0, so what is the degree of something which is equal to 0? You need to have some syntactical description of the degree, so you take all the pieces that appear. So s is just one piece, then n is the sum of pieces, z is the sum of pieces, and you define the degree of h as the maximum degree of all these different pieces, whose sum is equal to 0. Okay, so let's take an example of an incompatibility. It's clear that P strictly negative and P non-negative has no solution in Rk, which means that this system, P different from 0 minus P non-negative and P non-negative has no solution. And we need something which is in the monoid, so that's just P square. Then something which is in the cone, but in the cone I have two hypotheses, P non-negative minus P non-negative, so this is a product. And there is nothing in the ideal because there is no 0 here. And so the degree of this incompatibility. So the incompatibility is just p squared minus p squared equals 0. So p squared minus p squared equals 0 is a proof of the fact that this system has no solution in Rk. And the degree of this incompatibility is 2 times the degree of p, because that's what appears here. Okay. Another one, if we define the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, we know that ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, and delta strictly negative has no solution in R squared. In R squared, it corresponds to the fact that the roots are complex in this case. So what does it mean? Again, it means that, it means that we need to look at, so delta strictly negative, means that delta is not 0 and minus delta is not negative. And then we add the equation, we have something in the ideal now, which is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And we need to write something in the monoid, plus something in the code, plus something in the ideal, which add to 0. And just, you want to write x squared plus bx plus c at the beginning of a square. So you multiply by 4a, and you write it as 2ax plus b squared. And that's exactly the computation you did when you were in high school. And in this case, if we suppose that ABC are x and variables, the degree of this incompatibility is 4. If ABC, x were not, well, x is a variable, but maybe ABC are not variables, but some polynomials in other variables, then you would have to take it also into account. Okay. Okay, so now we want to prove these positive Stellansatz. And again, we look at the classical proofs, and they are very similar to the proof of Artin for Hilbert 17 problem. They are based on Zorn's lemma, transfer principle, and so on. Now we have also constructed proofs which are going to use quantifier elimination of factorials. But of course, there are various techniques for quantifier elimination, and not all of them have the same complexity. So, what is the basic of quantifier elimination? So, most methods for quantifier elimination eliminate variables one after the other. So there are more sophisticated, more recent ones which are eliminating variables by block, but in this talk I'm just going to mention this one. So what's the projection method? We want the list of realizable sign conditions for a family of polynomials, and they are going to be determined, fixed, or computed from a list of realizable sign conditions for a family, which I call the projection of P, which is depending now on one variable less. So this was the initial method of Tarski and Seidenberg. There is especially nice and elementary proof by Cohen or Mander, but all of them are primitive recursive. And it's only more recently with the what is called classical cylindrical decomposition, which was done by Collins, that we can make this projection method efficient, which means that the degree in the what's going on here? So you have the projection of P with one less variable, and you are going to project again proj of proj P with two less variables. At the end, you will construct a family of polynomials in one variable. And you would like this family of polynomials in one variable to have not too many elements, and also to have degrees which are elementary recursive. By the way, maybe I should have said what I mean by elementary recursive. Elementary recursive means like this. It's a function of several parameters which is bounded by a tower of exponential with a fixed 8. Like here, it's a tower of exponential of 8, 5, including D and K. So we don't want, for example, the number of variables to have to do with the 8 for the tower of exponential, and it would be the case for primitive recursive equivalence. So that's the definition of elementary. And in this case, cylindrical decomposition is a little bit like what I mentioned when I mentioned the work of Lothar Hermann. It is also based on some resultants, sub-resultants. So it is elementary recursive, doubly exponential recursive. But an important point for us, that the proof of correctness of this algorithm is using the geometric notion of connected component. So we are interested not only in the fact that we have a quantifier elimination, but we would like the proof also to be algebraic. It's important for us. And that's why, together with Daniel Perucci, we have now a new projection method, And the proof of correctness of this method is based only on algebra.
Well, why is that important? Is it important? for
It's
the- for the-
important
for the
because
bounds?
we are going to construct some we are going to need to start from a proof and to transform step by step this proof into a construction of algebraic identities. So we need the proof itself to be really algebraic. Okay, so it's going to use a few tools. What are these tools? The first tool is the notion of Thom encoding. So it's the fact that the real root of a univariate polynomial can be identified by the signs at x of the derivatives of p. So which means that you don't need, in order to know what a real root is, you don't need to have any, say, numerical information about the root, but only some symbolic information about sign conditions. And also we have kind of efficient method for sign determination. So what is sign determination? We want to compute at the root of p the signs of a list of polynomials, and it's going to be done by computing several Tarski queries, but not too many, only a few products of the QI will play a role. And of course, once we know sign determination, we can use it to compute the Thom encoding, because then we use as Q1, Qs just the polynomials which are the derivatives of p. Okay. So what are doing the constructive proofs of the positive Stellensatz? So we know only two constructive proofs of the positive Stellensatz, one by Henri Lombardi and the one I'm presenting now, which is also involving Henri Lombardi. So they are using quantifier elimination of the reals in the following way. We are transforming a purely algebraic proof that a system of sign conditions is empty based on the quantifier elimination method into an incompatibility. Okay, and so the first results were obtained more than 25 years ago by Henri Lombardi, and he was using this Cohen-Ormander algorithm I was describing for quantifier elimination, and in this case he gets a primitive recursive degree bound. So here he gets a tower of exponential for the positive Stellensatz, but with the height of the tower is depending on the number of variables. So it's really not elementary recursive. And now our work, which is based on this efficient projection method, correctness proof based only on algebra, using Thom encoding of real roots, signs of derivatives, and sign determination, we get, so now we need to deal with a number of polynomials, because it's a system of sign conditions, not only one polynomial. So it's kind of ugly bit of this for the number of bits of D written binary basis. And again, you get some kind of 5 level of exponentials. I'm not going to write it, but that's what we obtain. Okay. So now I want to tell you what is the connection between the positive Stellensatz and Hilbert 17 problem, because for the moment I didn't make any connection. So the connection is as follows. If P is everywhere non-negative in Rk, it means that P of x strictly negative has no solution. Okay? Which means that this system, P of x not 0 and minus P of x positive, has no solution. And what does it mean? By the Stellensatz, it means that some even power of the part which is not 0, which is just P here, plus something which is in the cone, plus something which is in the ideal, except that there is no one in the ideal. So something which is in the cone is just the sum of square minus P times the sum of square. Because if you have, for example, P square, you will enter it also in the sum of square. So this is the expression given by the positive Stellensatz. And this gives you an expression of P as the sum of square, because you put this part to the right, okay? You divide by the sum of square you have here, and this is not exactly a sum of square, but you get it by doing this. Okay? So if you are able to do some efficient, elementary recursive positive Stellensatz using this particular case, you will be able to express P as the sum of square of rational functions. And in fact, this famous denominator is coming here from the sum of squares which appear in the cone in front of P. Okay, so that's the strategy we want to use. We want to transform a purely algebraic proof that the realizable sign conditions cover Rk into a method of construction of incompatibilities for non-realizable sign conditions controlling the degree. And that will be a constructive positive Stellensatz because it will give us a method of construction of incompatibilities for non-realizable sign conditions. That's what we want. And we are going to recover Hilbert's 17th problem as a particular case, as I just explained. And we need the notion introduced in the former paper of Lombardi, which is this notion of weak inference. So I see that the logo for big proof is the inference sign. I noticed that this morning when I entered the building. So this is a specific notion of inference that we call weak inference. So it is, I mean, it's a little more general, but I'm going to need it in this special case. That's why I'm giving you this special case. Okay, so we are given system of sign conditions. F is depending only on U, and G is depending also on U and T, where T is another variable. We want to say, what does it mean that f of U implies that there exists T, so that G of UT? So what it's going to mean for us is that we are going to have a construction which, for every system of sign conditions, which consider as a context which is not containing the variable T because it's quantified, but we can include other parameters if we want. And every incompatibility, which is written inside this ring, we are going to produce a new incompatibility, which is going to involve F within a smaller ring. Okay? So it means that, well, if you like, what does it mean that A implies B? It means that if you have something which is impossible given B, it means that something is also going to be impossible given A. So you see, in a way, it's true that we don't do the same, we don't do what Artin was doing, but in a way, we really do something which is a little strange in terms of implication, because the implication is going for us, going from right to left. In order to prove that A implies B, we suppose that anything which is incompatible with B is going to be incompatible with A, and we want to do this through a construction. Of course, the construction is not is going to be something intuitive. So let's take, for example, an axiom of real closed field, the fact that a given polynomial, which is everywhere non-negative, is a square. Okay, so A is any multivariate polynomial, and C is any system of sign condition. And what we want to say? We want to prove that if we suppose that C of V and A of U equal T square is impossible, finally, C of V with A of U non-negative is also impossible. And of course, if we know that this has no solution. If this has no solution, we need that this has no solution. But we are not able, and the arrow is not in the right direction. We need to be able to go there directly through a construction. That's what we want to do. Okay, we want to prove the weak inference of A of U non-negative implies that there exists a T such that A of U equals T squared. And again, we are going to do that going from right to left. We are going to do that supposing that this is true and constructing some incompatibility proving that this is true. Okay. So I'm not going to give you the details, I'm going to make comments, but just to tell you. So we start with an incompatibility. So it means that this S belongs to the monoid generated by the elements of H, right? Because when we look at this here, of C, because when I look at this here, I've not added anything to the non-zero elements here, okay? So now this is going to belong to the cone generated by the ni, but multiplied by some polynomial which are squares depending now also on the variable t. And then we write the elements which were initially in the ideal generated by the elements of C, except that we have to multiply them by polynomial depending now on t. And then we are adding also some polynomial which are in the ideal generated by t square minus a, because it is t square minus a that we had added here, okay? So what I've been writing here is some incompatibility of the system we had before, C, together with a of u equal t square, except that we have to be careful with the variables because we are now writing this incompatibility in a bigger ring. Okay, then I do something, division, I will write again, and finally, by looking at some coefficients and noticing that some polynomial in t equals 0, I find something of this kind. Okay, so the same S, it is now A is included in the cone, which corresponds to the fact that here I take A of u non-negative. And this is in the ideal, so it's the incompatibility we are looking for. And of course, in this construction, we can keep track of the degrees because we had initial degrees and we can follow what happened. Okay, so we've been starting from a system, from an incompatibility of this set, we've been able to construct an incompatibility of this set, and this is the weak inference. And it's working. This method I'm describing is working for any C. I always do the division, I always identify, I always rewrite, and so on. Okay, so finally, what was the construction? It was a recipe which was producing a new incompatibility starting from a given incompatibility. So that's kind of maybe a little strange from a constructive point of view. I don't construct the initial incompatibility. And given an incompatibility, I need to have a machine which is producing another one. Okay? So what were the ingredients of the recipe in the example? It will be make an Euclidean division, group terms differently, deduce that some expressions are 0, identify the degrees, and finally, of course, keeping track of the degrees. Okay, that's the construction. So it's really algebra in the primitive sense, taking an expression, depending on variables, dividing, identifying coefficients, and things like that. Very elementary construction. Okay, so what are the list of statements that we need to translate into weak inference form? Well, first, of course, the axioms of real closed field. So, axioms of real closed field, they are the axioms of ordered fields. The fact that a positive element has a square, that's just the example I've been taking. And the fact that a real polynomial of odd degree has a real root. And what's very important is to control the degrees in this expression. So the fact that a real polynomial of odd degree has a real root is made by induction of the degree of the polynomial. So it's something which appears already in Artin's paper. So you go from degree d to degree d minus 2, which is also odd, to d minus 4 and so on, and you have to keep track of by making divisions. And so the degree with respect to a given variable is going down, the degree with respect to the other variables is growing, and you need to control what's going on. Okay, so now so you could say, well, okay, we are happy because we have all the axioms, why do we need to do more? I mean, normally, the proof is made from the hypothesis using just the axioms. But if we want kind of short proof given this kind of bound, we need to do a little more. So finally, we need to use the fact that a real polynomial is a complex root. And there is some algebraic proof, which is due to Laplace, that we are using here, which is making an induction on the power of 2, which appears in the degree of the polynomial. So the basic of the induction is when the polynomial is odd degree. Now if the polynomial has an even degree, there is some power of 2 in this degree, and we can do an induction on this power of 2. When we do this induction, the degree of the polynomial is growing, but the power of 2 is decreasing. At the end, we get a polynomial of odd degree. And that was important because, as I told you, in Hermite quadratic form, well, in order to prove that Hermite quadratic form is computing what we want, we needed to use the complex roots. So we need the complex roots in this construction. Now we need to say also how do we compute the signature of Hermite quadratic form. So first we have to prove that it is given the number of real roots of polynomial, and more generally the Tarski queries are given by same conditions on the minors. And then we need to say that there are two, we need to use Sylvester's inertia law, which is saying that the signature of a quadratic form is well defined. If you have two ways of defining the signature of a quadratic form, one which is by the Tarski query, and another one which is using the sign of some condition on principal minors, we have to say that it is the same value for the signature, which we are using also. And then we need also from some more modern computer algebra tools, which I mentioned already, this Tom encoding and sign determination. So we need to say that the realizable sign conditions for a family of univariate polynomials at the root of a polynomial is going to be fixed by the sign of minors of several Hermite quadratic forms. And then finally, that the quantifier elimination, the list of realizable sign conditions for P included in K of x1 is K is fixed by the realizable sign condition for the projection of P. And this projection of P consists of several minors of Hermite quadratic forms for P and products of Q, something like that. And finally, once we did this induction, I mean, eliminating variables one after the other, we finally find the list of realizable sign conditions for the family of polynomials. And it's been proved by, it is proved that it covers all of Rk by induction. This is done by eliminating variables one by one. Okay, so now I want to come back to the way we are going to produce the sum of squares. So we suppose that P takes always non-negative values. So we have a proof, it means we have a proof that P is everywhere non-negative, which means that there are no other realizable sign conditions. P equals 0. P strictly negative is impossible. Okay? So we transform it step by step in a proof of the weak inference saying that P is non-negative, using proche P, and so on. What does it mean? It means that if we have an initial incompatibility of H with the conclusion, P non-negative, we know how to construct a final incompatibility of H itself without any hypothesis, always going from right to left. Okay, so what is the initial incompatibility we are starting with? Well, we certainly know that P strictly negative, which is exactly P not zero minus P non-negative, is incompatible with P non-negative. That's what we wrote already. This is because P square minus P square equal to 0. That's the example I took before. But now we are using the weak inference. What the weak inference is telling us that from this incompatibility, which is using the hypothesis P strictly negative, we can construct, which is using the hypothesis P non-negative, we are going to construct an incompatibility which is not using this hypothesis. Okay, you see, here we have nothing, here we have this hypothesis. So if we have an incompatibility here, we are going to transform it into an incompatibility where P non-negative doesn't appear anymore. Okay, and that's exactly what I told you. It will be then some element, so it will be an incompatibility of this, which means that P is strictly negative. This incompatibility is written as some odd power of P plus something in the cone equal to 0, and this is exactly the expression of P as the sum of squares of rational functions. Okay, so we succeeded, and of course I didn't tell you anything about keeping track of the degrees, but you have to trust that in this long paper we do keep track of the degrees. And now I would like to discuss a little bit why is this work relevant for big proof. First, I think the first reason is that the organizer decided that I should come here and give a talk, so that's one reason. Of course, there are many meanings for big. I mean, so Artin's proof is great. Also, they take a long time to appear, so they are big in that meaning. For example, our work, which has been ending thanks to Daniel Perucci, because with Henri Lombardi we were not able to finish it. It took 25 years from the initial proof of Lombardi to the final writing of this paper. It's a long paper. It's also a high, I would say, unusually high bound for construction in algebra. And also, we have some technical lemmas on degree estimates which are totally elementary and very hard to check. And Daniel Perucci was the only one to check them. So if there are any volunteers to check these formulas, I would be very happy. I always try, I tried with Asia, she's not volunteer, so maybe more people are interested. Okay, so I stop.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
So why is it called weak inference? It seems very strong, you have an explicit. Is there, do you have?
Yeah, I mean, it's because it's, we cannot just call it inference because it's, so I don't know, we could, it's because it's kind of going the other way. I mean, that you, an inference, you are thinking that you go from left to right, that you start from A and prove B. But here you go from right to left, so, okay. So it is weak in the sense that it's going in the other direction. It's strong in the sense that it is constructing something. So, I don't know. We could call it strange inference or
Question. So, I mean, you don't need a formal notion of construction because you just give it.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's of course the whole point. That by construction here, it's not even something that we look. Yeah, I mean, the only constructions we are using is, you know, like I did, I take a part of the expression, I put it to the right, then maybe I multiply by something else, I come back to the left, I divide, I make some Euclidean division. It's purely, I mean, it's as simple as that. But so I could give you the list. Yes, of course. There is a list of all what the ingredients we need in a construction. It's purely, it's something you need to do by staying in the ring. You are staying in this ring of polynomials. So what can you do? You can add, multiply. Notice that something is now a square, and identifying an expression by, you know, developing an expression and identifying the pieces and things like that.
One more question.
Yeah.
So get this big upper bound.
Mhm.
Do you have an intuition, a guess as to how close to being sharp? Do you think that
Yeah. Yes. Okay, so what we know in the case of the positive Schelenzahl, there the general, because here we prove Hilbert's 17 problem going through the positive Schelenzahl.
Yeah.
But it's really a special case. So maybe if we were more smart than we had, we could deduce directly Hilbert's 17 problem without going through the positive Schelenzahl. We don't know how to do it. For the positive Schelenzahl, there are single exponential lower bounds in the style of the one we have for the new Schelenzahl. But for Hilbert's 17 problem, the best lower bound is linear in the number of variables. And this is very recent. Before, we didn't know even if it was growing with the number of variables.
So what is your guess, though? Is it closer
So-
to linear or is it closer
Okay,
to...
so well, the guess, well, I think it would be very unlikely that it's better than single exponential. We know also, for example, deciding the emptiness for the reals. If we don't eliminate the variables one after the other, we get some single exponential. So single exponential would be great. But I mean, for example, I told you we are using this algebraic proof of Laplace for the fundamental theorem of algebra. If we replace it by some other, as we have in mind to replace it by another proof, which is also algebraic, that would give only 4 levels of exponential. So in fact, maybe we can hope in a lifetime to go from 5 to 4. Life is short. Yeah. I mean, so, yeah.
Maybe a very naive question, but is there anything that depends on reducing the bound?
I mean, sorry.
Like, What,
Okay,
what,
no.
what goes better if you have a lower bound?
So what would be better? You mean?
Are there other mathematical results that,
Yeah, or
No,
maybe
in fact,
algorithms
it's
that
really,
get
no,
quicker,
it
or-
is really something that, no.
So that's not much of incentive.
No. No. It's already, I mean, it's kind of very challenging problem to
Mhm.
find some effective results where our team wasn't able to find it. So it's
Mhm.
that's the motivation.